What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and continue learning about amazing facts about Canadian history, part 2. If you didn't catch part 1, feel free to go check that out or stay right here, whatever you want. But if you don't check out part 1, you'll have missed some very fascinating stuff. I'm watching a Canadian YouTuber named JJ McCullough, if I'm saying that correctly, and he's going through the Canadian passport, which actually has a bunch of pages in it of Canadian historical moments that the Canadian government basically has selected as some of the most important parts and times and representations of Canada and its history. And I've not ever heard any of this before. I didn't know any of the things we've talked about. In part 1, we were talking about the Native Canadians, Aboriginal people of Canada, Samuel de Champlain, fathers of the Confederation, or the Canadian Founding Fathers, if you don't mind me saying. Has a bit of a ring to it. Founding Fathers of Canada, the railroad that was built across all of Canada in 5 years, if I'm remembering, and that famous picture of nailing in the final spike. Very dramatic photo shoot. And then the Canadian prairies, which apparently are not just there to look good, to be beautiful, but to actually provide important, valuable natural resources to Canada. Who knew? Wheat, oil, stuff like that. So I've actually been quite enjoying this. It's not only been entertaining, but educational. So I'm excited to continue here in part 2 of this amazing Canadian historical facts. So with that being said, let's continue.
All right, on the next page, we have Pier 21, Halifax, historic gateway to Canada. So we see a big cruise liner, and then we see a dock over here. Canada is, of course, a country of immigrants. We all come from somewhere. And during the 20th century, there was a large inflow of Canadians from various parts of the world, from Europe in particular. And, in the old days, people didn't just hop on airplanes. They had to actually get on boats and sail from Europe to Canada.
I feel like I need some context. I have to Google where exactly Halifax is. Excuse me for having to do this. Nova Scotia. That's what was in my mind. Oh, it makes so much sense now that I'm Googling it. Eastern, very, very eastern Canada. Hold up. Let's zoom in a little bit there. Yeah. Wow. So this dock in particular is known for being sort of a landing spot for a lot of 20th century Canadian immigrants. Well, that certainly sounds like it belongs in this that's very, very culturally important to Canada. That certainly seems like it belongs in this book.
And the entry point for a lot of Europeans who arrived on the shores of Canada was Pier 21 in Halifax, which is the most sort of easternmost port. My own mother.
Pier 21. That almost sounds familiar, the name Pier 21. I swear I've heard of that. Or there just might be a restaurant named that or something nearby. I don't know what's real anymore, but now I know. Pier 21, very important Canadian landing spot for a lot of immigrants. European, actually. Anyway, enough about that. That's just making me hungry.
My own mother, who is an immigrant from Holland, this is how she actually came to Canada. She came on a boat from Holland in the 1960s, sailed over, came to Pier 21, lived in Halifax for a while before she emigrated here to Vancouver. So Pier 21 is this very sort of romanticized entry point. It's sort of like Ellis Island in the United States.
Exactly. I was just thinking this reminds me of that. Wow. I never knew that about this. That's actually super cool. I think a lot of the choices of things to include in the Canadian passport are really good. Just from my standpoint, American, I've never seen any of this. I don't know anything. These seem like really great choices.
This idea that a lot of immigrants to Canada, This was their first sort of glimpse of what their new life was going to be like. And so it is sort of this symbolic, kind of romanticized image, as of course, immigration is still a very large part of Canada's reality today.
Yeah,
and there's also a quote here at the top. It says, "Canada is free and freedom is its nationality. The Right Honourable Sir Wilfrid Laurier." So Sir Wilfrid Laurier was another Prime Minister of Canada. He was the first French-Canadian Prime Minister of Canada. He was Prime Minister for, I think, about 15 years in sort of the late 19th century, early 20th century.
15 years? Is there a limit to how long you can be Prime Minister? I feel like I need to brush up on that now.
Considered a very sort of iconic statesman of Canadian history. Although, I do think that he's an interesting guy because I don't think that people really know that much about what he did in particular. He's just sort of a man...
Especially me. I feel like I'm being called out. Actually, it makes me feel a little bit better. I don't know, like in America, like this might be going on a bit of a tangent, but we're all taught American and world history a bit. American history growing up in school, but I feel like if you're not very, very interested in it, which is difficult to do when you're learning this as a child, it's very easy to not know a lot even about your own country if you weren't paying attention in like 7th grade in history class. Not too shocking of a scenario to imagine. So, I don't know. I feel like maybe some Canadians can relate to that too, because I'm sitting here not knowing about any of these people.
Man associated with late 19th century Canada at a time when the country was really sort of growing and thriving. All right, next page. We have the Parliament buildings of Canada. So this is Canada's most famous architectural masterpiece. This is the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. It's this enormous neo-Gothic sort of building in Canada's capital in Ontario.
Wow, this thing is ridiculous. This is like a castle. It's so fascinating how different the architecture of historical buildings like America, which doesn't have a super long history, but the old buildings that we have a lot of like columns, pillars and stuff made of stone. And it's this building in Canada is nothing like that. It's like almost what is this, like a European style? Or it reminds me of like London or something. I had no idea this kind of style was the Parliament buildings in Canada. Very cool, very, very. And I say all this with saying it's cool. I like it. It's a very interesting look.
There is this enormous clock in the middle, the so-called Peace Tower. The central block of Parliament is also what it's called. That's what it says right down here. The Peace Tower separates the two wings of the Canadian Parliament. You have the House of Commons on this side and then the Senate on this side. And then there is another quote up here that says, "Parliament is more than procedure. It is the custodian of the nation's freedom." The Right Honourable John Diefenbaker.
I don't mind the quotes either that they decided to put with some of these pictures. I think these are pretty good.
So John Diefenbaker was a conservative prime minister of Canada in the late 50s, early 60s. He was sort of a controversial and contentious figure, very sort of erratic, had sort of a very odd personality. But he was also a great romantic of Parliament, very defensive of Parliament's traditions and so forth. So this line here that Parliament is more than procedure, it is the custodian of the nation's freedom, that is a very sort of Diefenbaker kind of sentiment. The interesting thing about Diefenbaker is that even after losing election, he still hung around in Parliament for a very long time until his death in 1979. So he was very much considered sort of the Grand Dean of the House, a man with a lot of institutional reverence and knowledge.
Oh, was it in a good way? I was like, nowadays, if you're like not elected and you lose your race, and you hang out, you decide to like not leave and like hang out, be like, the cops are getting called on you. But back in the day, it was cool, I guess, or I don't know. I wasn't there, but I thought that was a funny tidbit. But the way he's presenting this, it's more of like he hung around to not be annoying, but to hopefully just share some of his knowledge as a veteran of Parliament and whatnot. So that's interesting and kind of funny.
And I'm sure no one considered himself more that way than Dief himself. All right, on the next page, we have the iconic Niagara Falls of Ontario. I think everybody knows Niagara Falls. It is one of the most famous tourist attractions in Canada.
Well, funny enough, like, I'm not too embarrassed to say this. I'm not too ashamed to admit it. But in America, I don't know if this is just a me thing or other Americans and stuff, but if you don't live near Niagara Falls, it is certainly something every American knows about. Everyone knows the name Niagara Falls, but for a long time leading into my adult life, I didn't know where it was exactly. I didn't know that it was literally on the border of Canada and the United States. I did not know that, so I don't know why that is. I don't know if Niagara Falls is more celebrated and revered and taught in Canada, or if I just missed the boat. the boat into Niagara Falls. Let's make this a full metaphor here. If I just missed the boat into under the falls here as an American, or I don't know, I gotta ask some people about this in America. Like, do you know exactly where Niagara Falls is, or is it just me? And they're like, why are you asking? No reason. I know exactly where it is. It's not because I didn't know. So anyway, the fact that it made it into this video and is in the Canadian passport, like, I'm not convinced Niagara Falls is in the American passport or anything like that. I guess that's what I'm saying here. Niagara Falls is a little more celebrated in Canada. Maybe. It's a theory.
This enormous, enormous waterfall. I actually had the chance to visit Niagara Falls a few years ago. It was quite a cool thing to see. You can go on a little boat and sail all the way through the mist at the bottom of the falls. I think at one time they claimed that Niagara Falls was like the honeymoon capital of the world. But I must say that Niagara Falls is also like a really, really tacky tourist trap. Like, it might look beautiful in these photographs, but if you are away from the falls themselves, everything is just like tacky restaurants and like what.
That's funny. I just reacted to Niagara Falls, like, not that long ago, so this is very fresh in my mind. And he's, like, absolutely correct. I think Niagara Falls is awesome. Even the city, even with all the touristy stuff, like, I don't care. I'll be a tourist. I'll give you my money. Like, if you're there to enjoy the falls, and why not have some touristy, fun city that's trying to sell you stuff? Like, I think it's fine if you're just approaching it with a light heart, you know, and all that, but it's definitely true.
Wax museums and like horrible tourist shops selling you t-shirts and snow globes. Like, it is not a dignified place. It is very much like being in Vegas or something.
Yeah, it's great.
So on the next page, we have the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in France. So Canada was, of course, a participant in World War I, and the most iconic battle for the Canadian side in the First World War was the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Over 3,000...
I've never heard of this, ever. This is a good one. And, if I understand, he's saying there's a memorial in France, which represents Canada's contribution. I never knew about that. That's amazing.
1,000 Canadian soldiers died in the Battle of Vimy Ridge.
Oh, hold on. I want to hear the whole thing.
World War was the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Over 3,000 Canadian soldiers died in the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which was this strategic battle to secure this important piece of territory from the Germans. And the loss of life was so dramatic, it really sort of changed the way that Canadians conceptualized a lot of things about their country. You know, the strength of its military, its relationship with Great Britain, its sort of role in the world. There was very much this sense that Canada was now, like, very clearly a country engaged in the politics of the wider world, and thus had a right to a sort of independent nationalism that was greater than had been previously in existence. You know, the only reason Canada was even fighting in World War I was because it was still technically a colony of Great Britain. So there is all this kind of, like, you know, romantic notions about how, like, the Battle of Vimy Ridge helped Canada become a country and this sort of thing. And
interesting. That's the kind of, like, insight, like, I would never otherwise have been able to know or grasp like that. I'm glad I'm getting to hear all this. That's very specific. But I can imagine that kind of thing. I don't know exactly how much it changed Canada, but like going to war in a foreign country and losing a lot of your own people in that way certainly would change how, like, Canada views how it's connected to the world at large and how much involvement it wants to have. Or since now it's involved, it deserves to have more? Like, I think I get it. I totally do.
Of course, there was this huge memorial that was built to commemorate the loss of life of the Canadian soldiers in Vimy Ridge in France.
Nice.
These two grand obelisks. Yeah, you see there's even a quote right here. In those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation.
Wow. Obviously the monument has like an emotional meaning, but just from a artistic standpoint, I gotta say, this is a very nice monument. Like, if this was like the sculptures handcrafted, like, this is nice. Like, I've never seen this before. And obviously the meaning is super, super meaningful as well.
Says Brigadier General A.E. Ross. The Vimy Ridge Memorial was actually in the news not too long ago because the Battle of Vimy Ridge was in 1917, and so the 100-year anniversary was recently, and a bunch of, the Canadian politicians and British politicians and French politicians and whatnot were all at this big sort of grand ceremony at the memorial. Okay, and now we have a little tableau of Quebec City, and then at the bottom here it says, the city of Quebec, founded in 16...
A tableau? A tableau of Quebec City? What does that mean? Oh boy, that sounds French. I thought tableau meant table or something. I took a little French in middle school. Tableau? Tableau? French? What does this mean? Does it mean castle? Picture or painted target? No, what is... This is telling me it's a painting. Is this a painting of a castle? Is that what it means? I think I have to go with that.
Tableau of Quebec City.
A tableau.
Grand ceremony at the memorial. Okay, and now we have a little tableau of Quebec City. And then at the bottom here it says, the city of Quebec, founded in 1608. So Quebec City, which is the capital of the province of Quebec, is one of the oldest cities in Canada, founded in 1806 by good old Champlain, who we remember from earlier. I've never been to Quebec City myself, but it's supposed to be a very beautiful city.
Dang. Yes. Man, it was a long time ago, like months and months ago. I was reacting to a video about Quebec City, and it is ridiculous. Ridiculous. The architecture in particular.
Very European seeming. They have a lot of very old architecture, very well preserved buildings from the colonial times. And then this building up here is the Hotel Frontenac, which is one of the most famous buildings in Canada. They say it is the most photographed hotel in the world.
Hotel Frontenac? Is this literally a hotel? Like, you can get a room in it and like stay while you're in Quebec City? It must be... there could be a whole video about how it is like to stay in this hotel, and I would watch it.
Although that also seems like a weirdly specific compliment, but it is a very beautiful building in a very beautiful city. Next page, we have the Northwest Mounted Police, and then we have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Nice. The Mounties. I was like, I know this. Yeah, I've learned a bit about the Mounties and their training. Now, I've never heard of the Northwest Mounted Police. Is that for like a particular, like the Northwest Territories or something like that? But I'm so glad the Mounties got their own like dedicated page. That's fantastic.
So another very iconic symbol of Canada is the Mounties.
I mean, that's an understatement, or at least very, very true. What is this? What is popping up during the Mounties? Oh, whoopsie. Little Adobe pop-up. Okay. Quit disrespecting the Mounted Police, Adobe. Anyway. This is like... I don't know if Canadians know this, but when Americans think of Canada, they think of maple syrup, hockey, igloos, whatever, kind of silly stuff. Not igloos being silly. Maple syrup is not silly. It's very serious. And the Americans think of Mounties. Like, a lot of Americans think there is no normal police force in Canada, and that it's all Mounties. Like, people actually think that. Anyway, so from my American standpoint, this is like literally a symbol of Canada for Americans.
The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, with their red uniforms and their big brown hats, soon to be making an appearance in Super Troopers 2. The Mounties are the National Police Force of Canada. They do not always wear those red uniforms, only on sort of symbolic occasions. But before the Mounties came into existence, there was this other police force in Canada called the Northwest Mounted Police, which we see over here. They existed from 1873 to 1904, apparently. And
Oh, they existed. They were like the first or older Canadian police force. Okay, that's cool.
part of the reason why the Mounties were created and the Northwest Mounted Police before them was to sort of bring law and order to the big empty parts of Canada, you know, that would ride over on John A. Macdonald's railroad into the empty middle part of the country, the prairies, where they would, you know, keep the Indians from getting too uppity and help protect the white settlers. You know, it is not an uncontroversial legacy, but it is sort of part of the Canadian story. In the old days, the Northwest Mounted Police officers dressed in a much more sort of British imperial kind of way with these little white helmets. They looked like the kind of people that were, you know, helping quell unrest in India.
Is that? Oh, that's interesting. Like, it's funny how the uniform is red. Like, the Mountie uniform is still red. Is that, like, an homage to that? Is there any connection between the red of the uniforms? I never learned about that.
So there's obviously a sort of lot of racial politics bound up in all of this. And now we have this nice little tableau of Canada's two most beloved...
Oh, yes. And he said tableau again. That really got me going, too. So tableau is like a painting. Hockey! Of course there's a page in the Canadian passport for hockey, dedicated to hockey. That is so great. Oh my gosh. And is that football? Wait, is that football? Wait, because, oh man, it's been a while. Was football invented in Canada? And that's that's blowing my mind to just think about. And I think Americans would downright deny it. Americans would be like, no, we invented football. There's no way Canada invented football. And I don't know. I love this page. I like this page a lot. I'm glad that, because hockey, like, it's a sport, but that's important, like, to culture, to, like, what you are as a nation. Like, it's something people are thinking about all the time, and it, like, gives you a lot of happiness throughout your life, like watching football, playing hockey, watching hockey. So even though I'm kind of chuckling at it being there, I do understand, like, it is significant, like, part of Canadian culture. So I'm glad it has its page.
Politics bound up in all of this. And now we have this nice little tableau of Canada's two most beloved sports, football and hockey. Yeah. So Canadians love ice hockey. I think that's kind of well known. Canadians also love American football.
I didn't know that. How did I not know that? Do Canadians like American football? Like, are Canadians out there watching American football on television? I have to admit, as an American, I don't watch American football very much. And I had no idea. I thought Canadians just were mostly watching hockey. I had no, that's cool, actually.
That is perhaps a little bit less well known. But the two highest awards in these two sports in Canada is the Stanley Cup, which I think everybody knows. This is the prize that the NHL gives to the top hockey team every year. And then the other trophy is the Grey Cup, which is the Canadian Football League's equivalent to the Super Bowl.
Oh, wow. The Canadian Football League. I've never seen that. And I didn't know there was a trophy. But if there's a Canadian Football League championship, then it makes complete sense.
Canadian rules for American football are a little bit different than American rules for American football, and thus there is a separate Canadian Football League. Although it is not as popular in Canada as the NFL, most Canadians who are football fans follow the NFL.
That's interesting. The Canadian Football League is a little different. Different rules, different championship, but most Canadians watch American football. Okay. I mean, in a way, it makes sense. Like, I imagine the American Football League is much, much, much bigger. America literally pours like billions of dollars into that sport alone every year.
Would say more than they follow the CFL, but the Grey Cup is the highest award for the CFL championship. Grey and Stanley were two famous governors of Canada. Okay, so these two...
Okay, cool. I think I'm gonna stop it right there because we're about 2/3 of the way done with all these amazing facts about Canadian history. I'm very much enjoying it, but I think I'm going to stop and finish this in part 3, which will come out after this video. Man, these are good. Like, so far, I don't really think there's been a single picture in the passport, a historical moment, that I knew. I mean, I am aware of hockey and there's some other stuff, but there's always some knowledge here that I've never heard before, and it's great. Like, I am loving this video, truly. Again, it's by JJ Makulo. Very nice. I gotta give it a like. But I will return for the final part. And if you enjoyed this video so far, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in part 3 or just more videos like this in general, me learning about Canada and Canadian culture and compared to America and stuff like that, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.